Well, if you remember right, when we finished chapter 14, they had found a note tied to a seagull, but there was a sailor somewhere on the island, a lonely sailor. And so this is called A Sailor Named Emily. We read and reread the message on the linen cloth to make sure it was real. Our one thought now was to search the coast for the smoking rock and to save the poor sailor stranded there. If only we had the bird who delivered this note to you, we could send an answer back, I remarked. Oh, I do have him, Father. He's tucked down in my sack, Fritz said, and he returned to his Kajak to retrieve the seagull. While Fritz held the bird tightly in his arms, I wrote this short line: Have faith in God, help is near. There's a picture of Fritz with the seagull. I think I would have written a question to try to help solve the clues as to where to look. Then I attached the slip to the seagull's foot and threw the bird up in the air. It flapped its wings and flew off toward the east. We mustn't forget the oyster beds, Father, Fritz reminded me as I watched the bird disappear in the distance. After all, it may be some time before we get an answer to the note, if we get one at all. The three of us spent the entire next day preparing our cargo. Then, with a soft breeze blowing, we too embarked for the eastern coastline. Fritz and Jack led the way in the Kajak, while Ernest and I steered the canoe loaded with equipment. At the last minute, young Nips, the son of our first monkey, hopped in along with Turk and Flora. At last, we reached our destination, which was as picturesque as Fritz had described it. As we sailed into the Bay of Pearls, for this is what we named it, we gasped, for the sight we saw took our breath away. We saw huge oyster beds nestled on the ocean floor. And there's the natural bridge that he described. We rested that night, and at dawn the next day we began our pearl fishery. With the aid of rakes, hooks, nets, and poles, we soon drew up large quantities of oysters. As they slowly popped open, we were delighted to see that each one contained a priceless cream-colored pearl, shining brilliantly in the tropic sun. That night, as we sat around our campfire discussing the exciting events of the day, we heard terrible noises coming from the jungle. We paid little attention to them until a short while later, when we heard the rustling of bushes near our campsite. We looked up, and there, in the flickering light, stood an enormous lion, crouched down as if he was ready to spring. Just as I was preparing to fire, a shot rang out, and the animal lay dead. Bless you, Fritz, I cried. You have saved us from a horrible death. But Fritz had never had time to reply. For the next second, a lioness, probably the mate of the dead lion, came leaping towards his body. There they are, opening the oysters to get the pearls out. She sniffed around the body and licked up his blood. Then she began to howl at the top of her lungs, as if announcing with those cries that she would devour us all. Fritz fired again, and his bullet hit the lioness's shoulder. Now the dogs rushed upon her and seized her flanks. I chose that opportunity to plunge my knife into her, but it was a costly victory. There, by the fire, slumped our beloved Flora, dead from the wounds the lioness had inflicted. Poor Flora, wailed Jack. She has done for us tonight what Grizzle did with the boa constrictor years ago. That's too bad, because Flora is the girl, so there won't be any more puppies either. I nodded and said solemnly to my sons, we must give her a proper burial. Flora received the honors of a torchlight funeral. We dug a grave and lowered our pet into it. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. I have allergies. We dug a grave and lowered our pet into it. Above the little mound, we erected a flat stone to mark her resting place. On it, we scratched her epitaph. There's the torchlight funeral. Here lies Flora, a dog, remarkable for her courage and devotion. She died under the claws of a lion, on whom she also inflicted death. It was with heavy hearts that our canoe and kajak sailed for Felsenheim at sunrise. As we passed through the stone bridge, Fritz rowed up to our canoe and handed me a slip of paper. Then, to my surprise, he shot off like an arrow. I quickly read his message. Dear Father, I am going alone in search of the sailor. Trust me and wish me luck. Fritz. Although I didn't like the idea of my son undertaking such a risky venture, there was no other course of action but to continue home. Elizabeth was overjoyed with the luxurious lion skins we brought back. Like me, she prayed that Fritz would be successful. 5 days passed, and still there was no sign of our son. At Elizabeth's urging, the entire family left on a searching trip around the East Coast in our sailing ship. There's Fritz rowing away while Dad reads his note. As we bobbed along on the sea, Ernest suddenly screamed out, There's a man, a savage, look at him. In the distance we saw a strange man coming towards us in a canoe. Terror gripped me, for it appeared that we had indeed fallen upon a band of savages. In one last desperate effort to avoid trouble, I called to the stranger in the Malay language, but he didn't answer. Then I yelled out a few common sailing terms in English, and this time he waved a green branch over his head. Nearer and nearer he came, and finally we recognized the painted savage. It was none other than Fritz. What are you doing in that costume? I called out as he drew up alongside us. He's lucky they didn't shoot him. They do have a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later. I disguised myself because I was afraid I might run into an enemy. For a minute I thought you were one. But let me tell you my good news. I have located the poor lost sailor. There's Fritz dressed up like they called it a savage. It would just be a native maybe to that island. Who is he? I asked. What is his name? The truth is, the sailor is really a girl, and her name is Emily, Fritz whispered to me, cupping his hands around his mouth so his voice wouldn't carry. A girl? I don't believe you, I whispered back, although I don't know why I did so. Absolutely true, and a very plucky girl she is too. For 3 years she has been living alone on the smoking rock. Now she is anxious to live with us, but she doesn't want anyone other than you and Mother to know she is a girl. Now come meet her. We returned to the shore to pick up Elizabeth, then followed Fritz. An hour later we arrived at a nearby island. After docking the ship, Fritz led us through some woods to a hut where a low fire was burning. Hello, Fritz called out. Down from a tree jumped a young and handsome sailor. Hello, she said shyly. I am Sir Edward Montrose. Can't tell from that picture that it's a girl. And that's the end of that chapter. I guess we'll have to find out more about Sailor Emily next time.